Welcome to episode 105 of the Middle-Aged Outlaws podcast. Today, Adam will be donning our tinfoil hats and letting loose with our views on some of wrestling's conspiracy theories. Adam, before we really get into this, I've got a couple of things I want to say. First, I'm going to apologise for my voice. I've got a bit of a Sophia Bush thing going on here. I don't know what's going on. I think it might be a mixture of air conditioning in Mallorca mixed with asthma, and that's what's going on. If that's the case, I might keep the air conditioning on. Maybe start like some sort of chat line or something.
Make a lot of money.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask before we get really started on wrestling conspiracy theories is what. First of all, I'll tell you what the definition of a conspiracy theory is, and then I'm going to ask you what your. I don't know whether to ask you your favourite general conspiracy theory or what is one that you believe in. So I'll describe, or I'll give you a definition first. Okay. Conspiracy theory is that which is a theory that an event or a phenomenon occurs as a result of a conspiracy between interested parties. I thought when you gave the definition of something, you weren't allowed to use the actual words in the definition.
I don't think that helps, does it? Yeah.
No. Do you have a favourite? Are you a conspiracy theorist generally, Adam?
I'm not really a conspiracy theorist guy. I remember it was all when I was watching this documentary, is it Room 237, about The Shining?
Oh, yes. The Kubrick stuff.
Yeah, quite into this idea that Kubrick shot the moon landing.
Yes.
And it was all faked. And then, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, nah. But I quite enjoyed that little period of time where I was in there. So that's probably the go-to one, even though I don't believe it. What about you? Nah.
The moon landing is definitely my favourite conspiracy theory. Okay. I'm fully on board with it.
Nice.
I think the US were so desperate to get ahead of the Russian or the USSR that they would have literally went to that degree. And there's a lot of evidence that
there's
points.
A lot of boxes ticked. Yeah.
I do like a wee conspiracy theory. I'm not a fan of the whole, a lot of the stuff that happened around 2021 and all that sort of stuff. That's not what I'm talking here. I'm more of a fun conspiracy theory guy.
Okay.
Than anything else. I'm gonna list off some of the more ridiculous wrestling conspiracy theories. We've got a small list of ones that we're going to discuss today, and we can't discuss everything because it would be a 10-hour. But I think this is from Reddit. It's like somebody's created a graphic with an iceberg, and with some of the more believable ones at the top of it and some of the more ridiculous ones at the bottom. So I'll tell you something. The pipe bomb was a shoot. It's not. No, the pipe bomb was not a shoot. I think sensible adults know that.
Yeah.
There will have been multiple Ultimate Warriors. Are you covering that one? No.
Well, we're going to tie in with the idea that at one point a change was made.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
WWE knows that Andy Kaufman is still alive.
Okay.
There's also one that Eddie Guerrero is still alive as well.
Oh.
Steve Austin had Owen Hart killed. Shut up.
Oh,
we've got the black eye for Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 9 was due to Bret Hart punching him. I've never heard that one before.
Wow, you have never. I think I've heard it being said it was Savage. Yeah.
Mr. America was Hulk Hogan. That's absolutely outrageous. I can't think why anybody would think that. A fan, this is brilliant, a fan at the first AEW show pooped themselves and refused to leave. Maybe we could tie that in with Dave Meltzer works for AEW.
Okay.
WWE made Daniel Bryan retire so that they could push Roman Reigns. I do think that they probably made him retire so that they didn't get sued at some point. But I don't know about pushing. There's obviously the one that's like the Roman Reigns illness was a work to try and get him over.
Dear. Oh dear.
The thing is, was it The Rock always says, this crazy business that I've lived in, or whatever it says, but you would be surprised. But also, if some of these things, You wouldn't. A lot of them they wouldn't be past Vince.
Yeah, it is a crazy world, wrestling, and it has been for as long as we've ever known it.
Vince McMahon sent Brock Lesnar to the UFC to make him a bigger star. I've never heard that before. I love that.
Because the big fallout was when he went to try and play for the Vikings, wasn't it?
That was the WrestleMania 20.
Yeah,
where they were getting booed and all that.
Proper had a fallout, but he did seem to be okay with him working UFC events after he was back in the fold.
I remember, Taker was at an event, tried to start an angle with him.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
Vince McMahon owns AEW? Nope. I just saw a ridiculous one. We've never seen the real McMahons, and the people that we've seen on TV are actors. I fucking love that.
There were so many, I struggled to convince non-wrestling fan friends that, no, that's just a family. That is legit the people that own it and the family. And they're like, no, don't be stupid. The idea to them of this was ridiculous.
I'd love that to be like a real thing you could dive into. WWE Saudi shows are intentionally bad. That's probably giving WWE a lot of credit. Yeah. Oh, I like this one. Undertaker wasn't supposed to lose to Brock Lesnar. I could get on board with that.
Yeah, I remember that one doing the rounds because he was knocked unconscious, wasn't he?
Yeah. So he says, yep. He says he can't remember a lot of the match.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of the ones that we're not really touching today, unless you want to delve into Steve Austin having Owen Hart killed for pile driving him at SummerSlam 97.
I'd rather stay away with it from that.
Okay. I will touch on Benoit, but I think my intention to touch on Benoit today will be to talk about how ridiculous the conspiracy theory is, especially with Kevin Sullivan now being dead himself, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, because that one is there as well. Kevin Sullivan had Chris Benoit killed.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've got a wee list each of ones that we're going to maybe either talk about, try and convince the other person that they're real, or not. Would you like to go first with one of your ones? I'm
happy to go first. So, the first one, it's a very well-known one. The Montreal Screwjob was a work. So, I think everyone who's into wrestling will be aware of the scene, but November 9th, 1997, Survivor Series in Montreal, Canada. There's plenty to watch about this. There's the event itself, which is actually a really good match until things have to go a bit pear-shaped.
Yeah.
There is Wrestling with Shadows because the camera crew were following Brett around making a documentary. There's a Dark Side of the Ring episode. I think there's certainly all sorts of podcasts out there discussing it, and I know that there are some ex-wrestlers who are absolutely convinced that this was a work. And just to set the scene a little bit, so Brett and Sean, former buddies, breakout tag team stars, Brett being the trailblazer for the non-steroid guys.
Who's Sean?
Brett.
Oh, Brett.
Yeah. He, the sort of normalish body guy who's getting the world title run after a great intercontinental run and tag run and all that. Sean feels like he's following in his footsteps, just a couple of years sort of behind Brett. And then things start to get a bit heated between the two. And it all basically comes to a head where Brett is asked to drop the belt to Sean. He agrees to drop it. Sean says something like, just so you know, I wouldn't do the same thing for you, because he's just an asshole. And Brett is not really having that. He's kind of had enough of this. There's a locker room fight that I think Sean then claimed he was in an unsafe work environment or something like that. Sean goes home. There's a little bit, people going a bit too far, scratching at some sort of reversed real life issues on the mic when talking about sunny days and things like that. So it's all a bit heated between the two. Brett is on a contract that Vince can't afford anymore. He has basically gone to Brett and said, look, I can't pay you. Go and see if you can still get that deal or even better from WCW. Go and get yourself a great deal. But Brett is world champion. The remaining pay-per-view and that feels important to say, pay-per-view that Brett is under contract for is the Survivor Series event. And Vince wants him to drop the world title to Shawn, but it's in Canada. Brett doesn't want to be losing to a guy that he feels disrespected by and has had some issues with in Canada.
Do you think Brett would have dropped the belt in Pennsylvania?
Maybe not to Shawn at this stage.
Right,
maybe
okay.
not to Shawn. But even
I'm with
worse,
you. I'm with you on Canada, but yeah.
Even worse that he's been asked to do it in Canada. Vince's biggest fear is said to be Brett turns up on WCW TV with the title. He can't let that happen. So,
yes, especially after Alundra Blaze did it.
Yeah, she dropped the title in the bin, didn't she?
She
on
did.
TV. Yeah. Now, Brett did have some dates left in WWF, but they weren't pay-per-view dates. So Brett rocks up to the arena. Vince is talking about, he's caught on camera basically saying, I think we'll do some kind of run-in or something like that. We'll figure it out tomorrow. Seems to be the gist of it. We'll get through tonight. We'll figure it out tomorrow. It's going to be a non-finish in the match. Now, Brett doesn't know, but he's clearly very, very suspicious based on some of the clips you get on Wrestling with Shadows, that he's going to get screwed, but he thinks he has Earl Hebner on his side. He's spoken to Earl. Earl won't do this. So they have the match, but unbeknownst to Brett, Shawn is basically being told that at the spot in the match, when Shawn puts the sharpshooter on Brett, the ref is going to be told, end the match, ring the bell, all that. Shawn will win the title. So that's how it goes down, with Shawn very much played, as far as Brett can see, as an innocent party in this. He's as confused as anyone else about what's just gone down. He is doing his best impression of a guy who didn't know as he scurries off with the belt. Vince has come down to ringside to get the timekeeper to ring the bell and all that. Brett spits in Vince's face. He does a WCW sign in the air. And they go back. I'm sure there's a locker room scene in Wrestling with Shadows where Shawn is saying, I had no part of this. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
And then Brett
asks him out. He's taking his boots off,
yeah.
And he's saying, Did you know about this?
Yeah. So I think in that one, I don't know how much blame I'm putting on Shawn, because he's clearly been told, say no, just deny it. You weren't anything to do with it. You're just doing what your boss is asking you to do anyway. But yeah, Brett then one punch, I believe, KOs Vince backstage, and there's a very groggy Vince walking away picture that we see. So
I love that scene of Vince. Somebody's helping him. It's Patterson or Briscoe or someone's helping him, and he's like totally cammy-legged.
Even before we knew everything that we now think we know about Vince, it still feels like he must have deserved that. So we're all quite happy that happened. So basically, where we go from there, before I'll get into some of the reasons to believe that this could have been a work, this incident, is we're going to get Vince having got Brett off this contract that he couldn't afford. He was his highest paid star. The company was struggling financially. They were losing a war to WCW. He managed to get him off the payroll, which was a big deal for the company at the time. Mm-hmm. Vince also was able to, through this process, create the Mr. McMahon heel character, because on Raw, after this has all happened, he is being interviewed by JR, and Vince McMahon is coming out with this, Brett screwed Brett, I do not regret any of this, he should have known better, is basically the way that Vince is going with this, which, whether it was intentional or not, is the beginning of him creating what is going to be the top heel on-screen character for what turns out to be basically the company reviving feud when he goes up against Steve Austin. So another, potentially a good thing for Vince, as well as saving the money. For Shawn, we are going to get him as world champion, although when I was looking through this, I was actually surprised for how little time that goes on, because I think I'd maybe thought it was still like a year before we're going to be crowning Austin, but it's only he'll win
5-6 months.
Yeah, he'll win the Rumble in 2 months from here, and then he'll win the title a few months after that. So
Austin was ridiculously over at that point. He was almost, I would say, Arena at Montreal '97 was possibly like red hot before.
Yeah. So he gets to be world champion, which I'm sure his ego very much enjoyed. He will have the heat in the locker room, and we hear the stories about some guys don't turn up for the Raw the next night.
Oh, yeah.
Mick Foley certainly didn't turn up. I believe Rick Rude basically quit the company over it. And some guys just very much not trusting Vince anymore, because the view is, well, if you did that to Brett, you could do that to any of us. Which, again, maybe a little bit of a positive as far as Vince is concerned moving forward. He gets to rule by fear. But Sean has the deniability. Everyone, the story is, he didn't know. He didn't know this. That he continued saying that for decades, I think. But we will get quite a short-lived run from Sean, because he's going to injure his back at the casket match against Undertaker at the Rumble. And that's basically the beginning of the end of part one of his career. Brett gets a very lucrative contract at WCW, but is horribly creatively misused. He carries this anger and rage about what's happened basically for the rest of his, up till now. I don't think he's fully over it. He does eventually make a return to WWE, do a handshake with Sean, beat Vince in, from what I remember, was an absolutely atrocious WrestleMania match, and gets put in the Hall of Fame.
He had a run as US champion for a very short-lived time as well in 2010.
Yes. So if we look at what happened and what happened after that, reasons to believe, in theory, everyone came out of this with something. Vince got a new heel character and a big chunk knocked off the wage bill. We get Sean, and again, I think his ego, just being world champion, he would have sacrificed basically anything from that, I'm pretty sure. I also imagine he would have enjoyed having been the guy that did that.
Yes, 100%.
We get Brett, who, again, we're very much talking in theory here, gets a huge contract at the other company, which we know how things did go down, but on the day you sign it, you're probably seeing some nice money in front of you and thinking, this could have come out worse for me. He also gets to have a documentary released that couldn't have been better timed in terms of what they picked up in terms of footage for that.
I think, can I just add to Brett? Were you finished with Brett? No.
I was going to add one more thing. I think he gets to walk away with this wronged hero sort of feeling. Like he has been screwed, and in his mind, he clearly, whatever way this went down, he clearly believes he was screwed. And he gets to walk away, I think, with his head held high. Because he hasn't done anything wrong here. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. If he's concerned about creative in WCW, almost gives him an opportunity to have creative almost teed up for him as a sympathetic babyface who was done wrong by those up north.
Yeah.
And he's here in WCW to, I don't know, like maybe take some vengeance out on those that came from up north, like the NWO. Yeah. And if he had his own concerns about creative, which we know that he did, then it sort of almost gives him a little leg up before even getting in there. I can see that.
So unfortunately,
I was trying to think, how could this all benefit Brett? But I could see that being appealing to him.
Unfortunately, they fucked. And we all know that.
Oh, they did, absolutely.
They had absolutely no idea of how to use a Bret Hart, which I think Vince not sort of said that to him when he was originally negotiating. They will not know what to do with you. And that turned out to be right, unfortunately, for everyone, basically. So how much convincing would you take to believe this could have been a work?
A lot, I think. I think simply because of somebody somewhere would have spilled, I think.
Okay, yeah.
But I also think Brett, I just, I don't know, he's effusive about all things. Well, I mean, I think after Owen's death, that might have been when Brett would have spilled, possibly. I don't know. I don't believe it, but I like it.
There were a few things I listed as, I've put at the end, this isn't a work. But many people close to it have maybe leaned into that idea just to try and, milk it for a bit. But there were a few things I listed. I don't believe that WCW would have aired Brett making WWE would have aired Brett making a WCW sign on their screen. I'm not convinced they would have allowed that to go on.
It was taken off. Remember, it was taken off the network though.
Was it? Okay.
They maybe didn't know he was going to do that.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe just got carried away in the moment. I do believe Vince would have let Brett punch him, even if it
Me too.
was all a work. But Brett just seems so genuinely devastated by it that I just can't buy that he could have been in on something here. And yeah, I also put someone would have cashed in.
Yeah.
Like someone would have said, I was there, here's the actual story, reveal all, that kind of thing. And I think some others who weren't attached to it, I've kind of tried to jump on that, but nobody who was really there and involved has.
Hall and Nash have both said they think it's a work, eh?
I remember hearing Scott Hall say it, yeah.
I think if WWE had received revenue from Wrestling with Shadows, you could understand, because all of that stuff backstage would have been worthwhile recording.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if that had been shown on WWE TV, you could be like, is this actually?
Mm-hmm. I also think the moment WCW, obviously Brett's injured in terms of being able to go in the ring and work. He's had his head kicked off by Goldberg. But from the moment they closed their doors, had it been a work, I think Brett would have been back in a role, not necessarily in screen, but he would have been back with the company in a role with, the idea of taking out Shawn or something like that. I think there would have been something done to lean into
it. Yeah, I agree. That's quite a fun one, though.
It's a fun one, yeah.
I remember seeing Scott Hall interviewed and him saying that. That was maybe on that dark side of the ring. I remember thinking at the time, like, no. But then the guys are in it. Like, they think they literally believe everything's a work.
Yeah, true.
Okay, that's a good one. I think I'll jump off from there and take your Shawn Michaels stuff. My one to start off here is Shawn Michaels is back in 1998. Was never quite as bad as portrayed. Are you happy for me just to jump on?
Yeah, go
from there. For full transparency, I think this is 90% true.
Okay.
So I'll do a little bit of background. So you mentioned there that Shawn injured his back at his match with his match with Undertaker at 1998 Royal Rumble in a casket match. We watched that together. You remember him coming over the ropes and he clips his lower back on the casket as he's going over. He allegedly herniated 2 discs in his back and crushed a 3rd disc. So we were told that injury at that time was so bad that he needed to retire only 2 months later, dropping the title to Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 14. I can recall during that match, WrestleMania 14, he did a lot of heaving and hoeing, and he didn't move particularly gracefully, certainly the way that we're used to Shawn Michaels moving.
Yeah.
That, of course, doesn't mean anything. So Shawn Michaels retired post WrestleMania 14. I wouldn't say a big thing was made of it, would you?
No, I almost felt like they kind of tried to sweep it away.
Sweep it under the rug. The last thing we were left with was Mike Tyson laying the T-shirt over him, and that was kind of it. Shawn Michaels went out with a whimper.
Yeah.
He returned in 2002 and went on arguably a much more decorated, much more impressive run than his first part of his career.
Yeah.
Certainly, between the Rockers, his sort of Intercontinental title stage and then his main event stage, you could definitely say that his second part of his career, his resurrection, if you will, was a lot more impressive, and there was no hint of any back injuries.
Yeah, that's fair. Yep.
So, going similar to what you were doing there around the Montreal Screwjob, I was trying to think, like, who benefits from this being a work? And the work would be, as far as I'm thinking, Shawn was notoriously a massive pain in the arse backstage. Shawn notoriously did not like to drop titles.
Oh, yeah.
He did it with Intercontinental title with Shane Douglas. He did it with Brett at least once.
Mm-hmm.
I think Montreal's probably another example of him not really wanting to drop the title. No,
Brett was
that's
champion.
Brett. My mistake then. I think we heard. Sorry, I'm thinking WrestleMania 14 is another instance we hear about Undertaker taping up his fists, ready to supposedly go out there if Shawn wasn't going to do the job. There was clearly questions within that building as to whether or not he was going to do it as well. We know that he was notorious for wanting to protect his spot, and we also understand that he had a lot of drug issues right up until that point.
Yep.
So I think it benefited Shawn to take time off. I do believe he hurt his back in that match. And if that's the case, then it benefits him to take time off. It benefits him to go home and sit and get paid. It benefits him to go and get mentally well, to rehab whatever sort of drug issues he has. And if it is the case that I was trying to find out how long his contract was when he stopped in 1998, but I couldn't find that anywhere.
Okay.
But if Vince has said to him, I'll pay you for the remainder of your contract, just sit at home, get well, and I'll bring you back once you've sorted all this out. Because we know that he did that with Kurt Angle, and we know that Kurt Angle said, no, I want to continue wrestling.
Yeah.
So that's consistent behaviour with Vince, and we've heard that he's paid for other things as well, haven't we? Like funeral costs and things like that. So it wouldn't be out of character for him to have done that.
I think much as we see him as evil, I think, did Vince not establish a program where anyone who had ever worked for WWE got their rehab paid for if they had to go into a facility?
Right.
I
didn't know that. That's amazing. So it would benefit Shawn, absolutely. Go home, get paid, get healthy, stay away until you're ready to come back. And he's always favoured Shawn Michaels, always. Yeah. And people have speculated as to what was the reason for that, and we'll not go into that. But it definitely benefited him. It benefits Vince because if Shawn Michaels says "fuck you, I'm gone," he's immediately worried that he's going to sign with WCW, and that's a ratings changer for WCW, getting Shawn Michaels, especially with Hall and Nash in WCW.
Yeah.
So I think it benefits all parties. However, I wonder if this comes with some caveats. Does this come with some caveats that he has to be on TV every now and again to remind people of who Shawn Michaels is before he comes back, before he gets back to, if he's going to get back to full health? Because I think in 2025 we've been led to believe that Shawn Michaels left in 1998 and then appeared in 2002, and everybody was like, wow, where did he come from? And it's just not true. He was commissioner. He appeared as guest refs a lot of times. He appeared as a commentator not that long after the Montreal Screwjob, because he was referring to Brett as a jobber on commentary.
Yeah.
And he appeared a lot. So, I just wonder I am speculating if the deal is go and get healthy, we'll keep paying you, you don't go anywhere else, and you come back when you're ready, but let's just remind people who you are as the years go over. And the other thing is the religion thing. And I also wonder if this is like used as a way of framing him as this reformed man. I think that we know that Vince does these very public ribs on people. Look at Chris Kanyon coming out of that box singing, "Do you really want to hurt me?"
Yeah.
There's countless. There's a million different. There's Moppy with Perry Saturn after he beat up that that guy on heat or velocity or whatever it was. And I just think, is Vince and Shane versus Shawn and God one of those huge big public ribs that only Vince would enjoy? Because there's so many, if you look for them, there's so many instances and stories of Shawn Michaels' behaviour post 2002 being just as bad as 90s Shawn Michaels. You just need to look for them. So I question if he's actually that big of a reformed character. If you've ever listened to RVD talk about Shawn Michaels, Stevie Richards, Dax Harwood, just to name three, and there wasn't a huge change. Like, and this is the other thing, I know I'm going on, but this is the other thing. If Shawn Michaels had been facing anybody else at SummerSlam 2005, people would have said, what an asshole. But he was facing Hogan, and everybody thought it was hilarious. If he'd behaved like that against anybody else, we would have been saying, what an unprofessional dick. So, Adam, try to convince you that this conspiracy theory that Shawn Michaels wasn't actually injured enough to retire and was kept from joining WCW and kept under contract to get himself sorted out and come back when he was ready is true.
Okay. I wouldn't need a lot of convincing. I think there's a few things where I would struggle. So I know that the problem for me with a lot of this material is a lot of things that I hear are from the WWE. So if you get like an interview or something and it's Triple H talking, and you know those times you talk about Shawn having returned, and apparently there was one of those where Triple H basically got him sent away because he was a mess. And
right.
So this is post the injury, in the role as commissioner or something like that.
Oh, okay.
And Triple H has gone to Vince and said he needs to be sent home. He can't be here, he can't be going out on screen, none of that. But Triple H is in the WWE machine, so it's hard to know for sure whether that happened. I think it's totally possible. I think we all know that Shawn either massively exaggerated or straight up made up the knee injury where he previously lost his smile and handed over the belt.
Yep.
I think with the back one, I was always a bit more, that doesn't look good. See, when you see it on the screen and he just catches the edge of it doesn't look good. So I think I'd always thought that there's something there, but whether it was as severe or whether they maybe thought, this guy does just need to go away for a while, so let's use this and have him go away for a while. Because you were talking about who it benefited, and it did in those ways benefit those people. Also benefited Triple H, because he got to step out of the shadow and into the spotlight. He became the man.
Not denying that at all either. And it took away any sort of potential backstage shenanigans to cut the legs out of Steve Austin as well.
Yeah. So I wouldn't take a huge amount of convincing. The religion thing, I was thinking as you were talking through Vince and Shane against Shawn and God, I was thinking, see if what's the bigger rib? Is it if Shawn has turned up as this genuinely very religious guy? Could you see? Because I could maybe see Vince as being like, ha, 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 I'll tell you what we'll do, pal. It's going to be you and your boy God against me and my boy Shane.
What did Vince say that day? He said something like, he said it like that, you and God versus me and the product of my semen or something like that.
Yeah, it's something like that, yeah. So I could see him doing that as a rib, but is it a rib at Shawn because he's genuinely gone down that route, or is it a rib at, I can't believe people are buying this shit. We'll make it that. I wouldn't take a lot of convincing. And I think, what you talk about some of the things you hear post. Again, I've heard Triple H saying, I wanted to do this skit where there's like, we've clearly just beat the strippers or something like that, but Shawn won't do it and stuff. And he's like, don't do that anymore. But we're only hearing that from Triple H.
Yeah.
So it's hard to 100% say that happened. We don't know whether he vetoed anything or whether that was all part of the plan. Who knows? But yeah, I would not take it. Would not. It's not a stretch at all for me to believe that. And I think a combination maybe of a bit of an injury and a drug problem, Vince saying, "Yeah, you need to go away, and I will bring you back, and I'll keep you on the payroll, and I will bring you back, and then you'll have a great run." Something like that. I could see him do that.
Yeah. Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
I think based on these two put together, I think we can just agree that Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and Vince McMahon and Bret Hart are assholes.
I never thought I'd hear you say that about Bret.
Sorry, I love Bret, but he takes himself very seriously.
He does. Take a day off, Bret.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to think if any of mine naturally flow into that, but I think it'll just have to be a bit of a deviation.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go to Vince Russo was sent to sabotage WCW. Right. So, a little bit of backstory. Vince Russo was at WWF, I think from about 1992, and started taking over control of writing of the WWF magazine.
Yep.
At some point down the line, Vince really started liking the content of this magazine to the extent he brought it into a creative meeting and basically said to all the creative people, this is what we need to do. Yeah, so he's loving how edgy it is. Maybe the car crash formula comes across really well in the magazine. I don't know, I wasn't reading it. I can just imagine your likes of Bruce Pritchard, and if Cornette was in the room, probably just getting up and walking out. But yeah, Vince is giving him a role on the writing crew because he really likes what he's done with the magazine. And then in 1997, Vince Russo becomes head writer for the WWF, and they're just going into what is a very successful boom period. The company is red hot at this time. Russo, there's a few positives you can talk about his approach. There's negatives you can talk about his approach. Some of the stuff, if you go back and watch it now, is incredibly difficult to watch. It's all over the place. It's a mess. But for whatever reason, in that moment in time, it kind of worked. And I think one of the reasons it worked for me, everyone had a story. You've got your guys at the top, they have a story, but your guys that are opening the matches, your guys that aren't on the free pay-per-view, they've got stories as well. There's 100%. A story going on for everyone. Yeah. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. It was chaotic when you watch the shows, and we'll get there. It's going to get away from him a wee bit. But bear in mind, much as he is head writer as his title here, we know what Vince McMahon is in this period of time. Nothing is going to get on WWE TV without Vince.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
So we are going to get to the stage where I think it's around the time SmackDown is being introduced as a second main TV show for WWE. And Vince Russo is basically just going to be told by Vince McMahon, we've got this new show. You're going to need to make this work. Make it work, pal. We'll get through this.
Was Russo head writer for both shows?
Right at the start, yes. Aye. There's no...
Storylines just bled across the show. Obviously, it was never anything like what it's like now.
They did at that time, yeah. So, yeah, obviously, though, it's an increase in workload, and Russo is basically asking for a pay rise. He's feeling a little bit disrespected. He's feeling burnt out. He's feeling like it's an awful lot for him to have to take on. And he is going to, in frustration, quit and take a job at WCW. Now, WCW have been through their period on top. They're on the wane now. And they are kind of churning out the same old guys on the top spots of the card most of the time. They've maybe not created a lot of new stars during their time on top. I think, aside from Goldberg, there's no real sort of headliner that you would think of. Yeah. So, he's going to take on the role, see if he can bring what worked at WWE into WCW. And Ed Ferrara is also going to go with him. So I think I hear some things that totally dismiss how important Russo actually was to WWE's success, but I think when you break it down, He was certainly, from what we hear, involved in a lot of the DX stuff. He was involved in a lot of the Austin McMahon stuff, and Undertaker and Kane. And, apparently also the rises of Mick Foley, for example, becoming a big player in WWE. So he's done some good stuff there.
Aye, 100%.
It's not quite going to work out when he goes to WCW. Now, there's a few different ways of looking at this. So we're in, I think, 1999 at this point.
So what, if you know, what sort of input did Russo have on like the NWO splintering off into Wolfpack and Hollywood? Is that before he got there?
That was before he got there, I believe. So what
can he blame that on?
I don't think so.
Vic Venom.
I think that not all just done by the guys because they wanted to sell twice as many shirts.
Oh, Nash was on the booking committee at that point. That's right. Yep.
So basically, he's going to go in with the idea of creating new stars and putting some new fresh talent on top. Yeah, new blood, indeed. It was a mess. It was a mess when he walked in, so we can't just blame him for this mess. They are apparently also quite handcuffed by standards and practices in a way that WWE aren't. So we know WWE have very much gone risky with a lot of their content. They push the envelope. Apparently, and I've heard Nash talking about this quite a lot, at every creative meeting, there's some guy sitting in the corner who's like, you can't do that.
Yep, I've heard that too.
Yeah, so he's trying to bring in the same car crash style TV. Basically, his idea is something is always happening. Something significant is always happening on screen. It'll switch from one thing to the next like that because he wants people to be scared to change the channel, thinking they're going to miss something.
They could do with Russo working on WWE Raw now.
Is it the opposite of that?
Aye.
Is it just not happening?
Yeah.
It's probably you probably need a mix, a bit of a blend of these. So yeah, he wants to push, among others, Jeff Jarrett, Booker T. He wants to make a big deal out of Booker T.
Brilliant.
This whole pushing the new stars doesn't work for some of the established guys, brother. That's not really gonna go down how they want it to.
Yeah.
So he's also, I remember, like some of the WCW stuff I've gone back and watched. When you get a swerve, it's supposed to be a surprise. You're supposed to, oh my God, I didn't see that coming.
Yep.
But if it happens in every match, with every angle, if everything's a swerve, you expect it to happen in every single angle.
You need to swerve it again, or you need to go for a straightforward finish for it to be a swerve.
That one match in that sort of 18 months or so where there was actually a clean finish and no swerve. That's the thing that swerved everyone because nobody saw that coming. So yeah, the story has been he had no filter. So he had ideas of what he wanted to do. But with him being the top of the tree for a period of time in creative in WCW, there was nobody for him to put those ideas through because he didn't have a Vince McMahon anymore. He also alienated many of the top stars who were on big contracts. Now, Turner, when Turner first were pushing the envelope with WCW, were paying out big guaranteed money contracts to a lot of big stars to bring them across. Started with your Hogans and Savages before, and it obviously extended with your Nash and your Hall, and then basically anyone who'd ever been on WWE TV. Yep. Anyone you could get, and they're on good contracts. The problem is, with pushing your young blood, are these guys just being paid to stay at home? Because they're being paid a lot of money to not be on your TV screen, which probably is only sustainable for a really short amount of time, and certainly isn't going to be sustainable when Ted Turner doesn't have any control anymore. So he's not there to write off the losses anymore, and there are businessmen at the newly bought over network who are saying, if this isn't making us money, we're not doing this anymore.
They don't get or like wrestling.
Never wanted it on their shows. We get a few instances, but I felt a bit bad for him when I read up on this one little bit of research. So he had a plan for a show He had all of his pieces in place. His WCW champion was Bret Hart. His US champion was Jeff Jarrett. They both contacted him on the same day to say, I cannot make this show. I am injured. I cannot perform.
Yeah, that's quite bad. That's quite sad.
It's not ideal. Now, in their absence, Vince Russo apparently proposed that Tank Abbott win the WCW title.
Ah, bro.
Now, this was, in the end, the final idea where Vince Russo had solo control. Because after pitching this idea, he was removed from being the head of creative and told he was going to have to work in a committee instead.
By who?
So this would have been whoever was running the network.
I tell you, they should have just let that guy take the reins because they also knew what he was doing.
Now, certainly the committee featured, I think one name I read was Kevin Sullivan, who had been a head booker before, so they're probably bringing a whole bunch of people into the mix. Russo hated this. He hated being there but not being the guy in charge. So he's going to go home. He's going to walk out. He is going to go home. He's going to get paid for a little while. The new booking committee, interestingly, put the title on Benoit, even though he told them he was about to leave.
That's right, yes. And Sullivan was on that Sullivan was on that committee who made that decision.
Yeah. So a little bit of time passes, and Vince Russo returns to the show to co-lead it with the returning Eric Bischoff. Now, I can't imagine how anyone thought this was going to work, but these two guys were supposed to work together. Apparently there was no real significant heat between the two of them individually, but I'm sure from stuff I've heard Bischoff say, he just knew. He was like, I'm really not going to be able to work with this guy. We get an idea between the two of the New Blood against the Millionaires Club. So New Blood being the guys Russo wants to push, the Millionaires Club being the guys that Bischoff did push over all the many years. We've seen, different incarnations of that kind of thing, especially TNA. We saw that, didn't we? It was like the
main event mafia and
that was it. Yeah,
the sort of originals, TNA originals or something like that.
Yeah, we're going to arrive at a Bash at the Beach incident where Vince Russo had this idea of Jeff Jarrett beating Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan wasn't for that. Everything they tried to work out didn't work for me, brother. So in the end, Vince Russo has told Jeff Jarrett to just go down, lay down in the ring. Hogan pins you, takes the title. Whether that was supposed to happen or not has had a little bit of conjecture, but I think there is an opinion this was a plan. This was always supposed to happen. The bit that wasn't supposed to happen was later on. When Hogan's left, he's in a limo with Bischoff, apparently. I can totally picture that. And they're driving away from the arena. Russo comes out with a microphone and he basically says that Hulk Hogan played his creative control card, and I swear to you, you will never see that son of a bitch on our screens again. Now, apparently, he was supposed to go out and say something belittling Hogan, but not quite as strong as that, and maybe not mention creative control and stuff like that. But anyway, whatever it was, it irked Hogan, who ended up suing the company for what was said. And I think it maybe turned out to be true. I don't think you ever did see Hogan on the screen again. He won his lawsuit, I believe.
Did he? Oh.
Russo, slightly surprisingly, continues in WCW. He has a program with Goldberg, which is sparked by Russo having a go at Goldberg for refusing to follow the script.
Yeah.
No, don't do this. Nobody do this. Russo then wins the world title, or is awarded the world title.
Yeah.
He apparently got a legit bad concussion from a spear. I never would have thought Goldberg would hurt him. Everyone pray for Gunther. He never, after the concussion, never worked in WCW creative again. However, when the company folded, Vince Russo did go back to WWE for a full 2 weeks in 2002.
Yeah.
He apparently tried to kickstart the invasion angle again, which everyone else had more than happily moved on from.
So it's done. And hasn't he claimed that he was in Vince's ear, or he's done like almost like outsourcing of supporting on different angles throughout the years.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I always say it's a Bloodline that he said that he was. Is that true?
I definitely know he has claimed involvement in angles. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he's claimed involvement in them.
Like the very start of it. What do you think?
Writing this, I was struggling to believe it. I put reasons to believe it. The eventual downfall of WCW. That was obviously in Vince's interest. He bought it for, the cost that they thought a videotape library was going to be worth at that point in time, although it ended up being worth a hell of a lot more than that. And he did very quickly return to WWE, but he only returned to WWE for a couple of weeks. And I feel like the things he was trying in WCW didn't, if you look at them in terms of their storyline, and you look at the WWE storylines, I don't think it's at all outlandish to believe that the guy that came up with those WWE ones believed these things would work in WCW. Yep. So I do not think he was trying to sabotage. I think he was trying to make it work. So I don't believe it, and I do not believe he would have ever for 5 minutes be able to pretend that it hadn't happened. If he was sitting there, he would be talking about it every day.
100%. He's one of these men that, a bit like Cornette, ironically, that claims to hate everything about the business and yet continues to make money out of it and talk about it every single day.
I also think when it worked in WWE and we had quite what seemed at the time anyway like a good mix of things on the go. You had him, you obviously had Vince, but I think you also had people like Cornette and Bruce Pritchard who would have been saying, what about wrestling? What about wrestling angles? And that probably led to a mix of the car crash with the wrestling stuff.
Aye. That's what, although Cornette's hardly an impartial viewpoint on Russo, but he's always said that having people there to counter, because he's talked about on his podcast some of the most ridiculous angles that Russo used to propose, and they're genuinely bizarre, a lot of things he would propose.
A picture of a notepad or something like that had all these things written on it that he'd proposed.
I remember we were texting back and forward about them. I wish I could remember some of the things, but they were just outlandish, ridiculous.
Yeah. So okay, I went a wee bit long there. Apologies, I went on it.
No, you're fine. It's good. It's interesting. I think also his TNA booking run would show that he had a formula and he tried to copy and paste it, and I think you almost get the impression he was probably flying by the seat of his pants in WWE a little bit.
Yeah.
He's almost lucked his way in. He's a bit of a Vincent Company. He's lucked his way into this prestigious job. Okay, I'm going to very quickly talk about Benoit, and then I'll talk about another one that's quite small, and then I'll go back to you if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
So the conspiracy theorists who really like to wear tinfoil would love nothing more than to believe that Benoit wasn't the one that was responsible for the death of his wife and his child. They'll tell you that Kevin Sullivan, who has a history of occult characters on screen, was involved. Benoit and his wife Nancy, who played Woman on WCW TV, they had an affair. She was originally married to Kevin Sullivan, and the conspiracy theorists would say that Sullivan wanted his revenge and he was involved directly himself, or he hired hitmen to do the job for him. Some of the stuff that points to that is Benoit had CM Punk, he was due to wrestle Chris Benoit that very evening on a pay-per-view for the ECW title, and Punk himself has said that prior to it he was very cheerful, looking forward to the match. He pointed to his child to Punk and said, that boy there, that's who I live for, that's who I do everything for. But that's no evidence. That is evidence of a man who's potentially dealing with other things going on, like his best friend having died and having very serious issues going on with his brain. There's other things that they touched on the Dark Side of the Ring about. I think it was about it was about the Benoit, because I think they do a double. Is it a double episode on Benoit possibly?
I remember, it was a double episode, and I think quite a lot of it leans into obviously what happened with Eddie Guerrero passing and the effect that had on it.
He mentions, I think it was Chavo mentioned that he sent him very specific text messages about where the dogs were or something like that. As juicy and as fun as it sounds to think Benoit didn't do it, and he was a beloved wrestler of a lot of people. He was an incredible wrestler, and it would be nice, I think, for some people to be able to not have to think that guy and that wrestler who was so revered, I think, by a lot of people, is a bit of almost like an underdog, almost cult hero type to some people, and a bit of a throwback as well, to be able to say it wasn't him that did it and I can go back and still enjoy his matches would be pretty nice for some people. But it's, for me, clearly absolute nonsense, and that's why I don't really want to go into it too much. I take it you're on board with that.
Yes, I mean, I think, the only... I think the thing where it makes it difficult to attribute the blame isn't whose actually hand it was that did it. It's the mental state of the person at the point in time that they did it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no doubts about who did it.
Yeah, it's sad, and I think as time goes on, it's still a difficult one to think about. Obviously, it's two people that lost their lives at the hands of what you can only imagine is like a maniac, and the person that closest to them, to us, he was a wrestler that we enjoyed watching, and I suppose you associate your own memories, with watching some of his matches, and happy memories. It's a difficult one to sort of put together in your head. So that's a quick one. Another one of mine is that Dave Meltzer is employed by, is paid by, in some description, All Elite Wrestling and Tony Khan. And, the argument for this is simply that Dave, at some point in his career, seems to have just went, this is the kind of wrestling I now like. And, he's probably the most influential wrestling journalist of all time. There's probably no doubt in that. There's scope for that to change, but at this point in time, Dave Meltzer was and is the journalistic voice of wrestling. So he's got a lot of influence, and he can influence his subscribers to the Wrestling Observer newsletter on what to watch and what not to watch. And like I say, at some point in time, it's like he just went, WWE is not very good. The Japanese style of wrestling is what I like, and there's these American wrestlers who are doing that better than anyone. The likes of Omega and Page, Hangman Page, and the Young Bucks, Will Ospreay, Jay White, lots of different wrestlers. They've ended up creating this company, the Young Bucks, Omega, and Cody Rhodes, along with Tony Khan, and he's fallen in love with it. And he's broken his 5-star record for weekly televised matches of things where there's very clear ways of wrestling that go against the sort of traditionalists of no selling, silly comedy wrestling, things like that. In some people's opinion, it's silly comedy wrestling. The Young Bucks played into this with the whole, they started naming their finishing move the Meltzer Driver, and there's footage of Dave Meltzer in the crowd at PWG events, absolutely loving, them pointing at Meltzer and shouting Meltzer Driver, and him looking like he's received a kiss from the hottest pop star on the stage, sort of thing. And so So to sort of either support or go against this, I looked up to see how many 5-star or above star ratings each promotion has had in the history of their company. Right? So obviously these match ratings are given by Wrestling Observer newsletter, which is Dave Meltzer's owner of. So All Japan Pro Wrestling in its history has been given 37 5-star or more ratings. TNA 3.
Oh, well done, TNA.
WWE/WWF 23.
Okay.
All Elite Wrestling, which has been an organisation since 2019, has 49.
Okay.
21 of those above 5-star.
Oh.
So almost half of them. And New Japan Pro Wrestling, 101 5-star or more. Now, I think the New Japan one you can put aside because New Japan Pro Wrestling's been going since when? 70s or before?
Yeah, but I would imagine pretty much the whole length of his journalistic career they have existed. Yeah.
And he likes that style of wrestling. There's the whole, if that match was in the Tokyo Dome, Meltzer would chuck an extra star and all that sort of stuff. I think you can, yes, 101, but you can put that to the side. WWE's been going for a very long time. I would guess that he's been rating their matches since the 80s, early 80s.
Yeah, I would have thought so, yeah.
23 5-star matches. I mean, we've probably seen 23 5-star matches in 100 episodes of this podcast.
Yeah. The numbers are interesting. Yeah.
And like I say, AEW 49. I think it's very clear that Tony Khan uses Dave Meltzer as a sounding board. He loves ratings. He's a stats guy. I think it's his company that Fulham use as far as their next generation stats and all that sort of stuff. I think he's a stats guy. He likes the whole 5-star review type thing, and I think he's probably quite a numbers-based guy from what it seems. So I definitely get the impression he uses Dave Meltzer as a sounding board. I think he wants to, as a promoter, he wants to have the most influential journalist on site. And I think a lot of those guys that he's probably developed a personal relationship with, like the Bucks, Osprey, Jericho. I'm almost 99% sure Jericho's the source of pretty much everything that gets to Meltzer about AEW.
That would be a surprise.
I think that it's simply a case of him having his head turned a little bit, but also probably appealing to a little bit of a switch. He's a salesman. He sells subscriptions of his newsletter and needs to appeal to what his newsletter subscribers like. And I would think that a lot of online fans are more AEW than they are anything else.
Yeah.
So that's my view on that.
Okay. I think I wonder, and you would never know this without speaking to Dave Meltzer, does he get a bit of a kick out of his perceived association with the organisation? Like if we were to do, if we gave every match that we'd ever seen a star rating, there would be no doubt a style of match that you would give more 5-star or high-star ratings than other styles.
Yeah.
And same for me, and they might not be exactly the same as each other. I think for me, rather than me thinking he's on the payroll, I think it's interesting from the point of view of they're obviously valuable to some people, but what is the value in the star rating system? Because he's obviously given the high star ratings to what he likes, and that is what anyone would do. I
don't know if that's particularly true. Remember we spoke about this and he'd said that he'd given like a 5-star review to something he hadn't seen.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, true.
And he talked about like that. Whilst I didn't particularly like that match, the fans and the audience seemed to be really enjoying it. And it's like, but it's your star rating.
Yeah, like I mean, if I would be giving Lucha Underground matches 5 stars, and other people would be saying, well, what about, what about the main event of WrestleMania?
Aye.
But yeah, I mean, you're probably more right in terms of maybe the two, he and the company, making use of each other and benefiting from the association. I can't imagine he'd be on the payroll, because that would
somebody would find that.
Yeah.
Aye.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, you hear that Vince McMahon was friendly with Dave Meltzer when he became owner of WWF. Bruce Pritchard was friendly with him and used to feed him information. Jim Cornette was friendly with him and used to feed him information. So it's not far-fetched to assume that Tony Khan would also do the same thing.
I'd heard Jeff Jarrett saying Jerry Jarrett basically it'd be a weekly call with Dave Meltzer to talk through, these are the things we're going to lean into. These are, you can maybe drop a little nugget about that because that's the direction we want to go in, but it's not set yet or something like that, and then you also hear, I think sometimes people deliberately fed in false information because they got a bit of a kick out of it appearing on the newsletter. They're like, we planted that.
I suppose it's just like 90s would be, you're getting that out to hardcore fans. Now it's just something that gets posted on Twitter. Yeah. And millions of people see it, and people online make a big deal of every little thing that is posted, and it's become completely almost like journalism isn't journalism anymore, really, is it? It's become just a ridiculous, 24/7. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but it's just there's no integrity to anything. It's
clickbait, and you're just trying to grab attention with a headline, and it's I think I've never actually read any of his stuff. It's funny because I suppose the idea now of trying to be ahead of the game, if I was really invested in a product, I don't think I'd want to know.
No.
Well, I think we crave the days where somebody came out as a surprise appearance or something like that. We didn't know that they were coming. But obviously some people want or need to know, ahead of time. It's a funny one. It's journalism about something that's scripted. It's strange, but the guy's made a hell of a career for himself.
How do you think HBO would feel about a journalist posting basically spoilers about the finale of Game of Thrones?
Yeah,
it's my understanding that Arya Stark is going to be the one. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh. Whoever was found to be the leak would be they'd be blacklisted in Hollywood. That'd be it.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. Like Ariel Helwani got basically blacklisted from the UFC because I think he spoiled. Was it that Lesnar was going to be on a card? Was it when he fought Mark Hunt? Maybe, and he's never been allowed back to cover UFC. Yeah. But it's a non-scripted. Yeah. That's what a journalist is kind of supposed to do with a legitimate sport. That's a funny thing. Yeah. Okay, so that's my two sort of quick ones. Okay. What you got next?
I'll probably go through this one fairly quickly. Ultimate Warrior was replaced. So, basically, we know Ultimate Warrior, ridiculous, muscle-bound, charismatic star, all about the entrance music and the quick matches. He becomes the man at WrestleMania 6 when he beats Hulk Hogan to win the world title. His run at the top, a bit of a disappointment, and basically they've found a way to get the belt off him onto Sergeant Slaughter so they can go back to Hogan. We're going to get a situation where at SummerSlam 1991, Ultimate Warrior has sent Vince a letter demanding, I think it was $500,000. He felt he was owed for performances. He wasn't happy with some of the payoffs he'd got. He'd already been advertised team with Hogan at SummerSlam. They were going up against Slaughter and his team. Vince agrees to pay him the money to get the match in the ring. when Warrior goes back out of the curtain, running, holding a chair, I think. He fires him on the spot. Hogan's left in the ring, posing with Sid, who, is just as muscle bound as Warrior was, and a better worker. We move on to there's no sign of Warrior. It's not like the days where it'd be everywhere in the news nowadays that Warrior had been fired, but it's he's just not there anymore as far as we can see. We get to WrestleMania 8, and with Hogan set to leave again, Vince has asked Warrior to come back. So after what I found out was a botched run-in from Papa Shango, Sid was never meant to kick out of the leg drop. Papa Shango was supposed to interrupt the count, but he hadn't showed up, so Sid had to kick out.
That's funny.
Which would have enraged Hogan a little bit. Yeah. Right on cue, as Bobby Heenan says Hogan ain't got a friend left, as Papa Shango and Sid go to work on Hogan, Warrior's music hits, and he runs down. And I had another look at this, because he does look different. But it's really hard to put your finger on exactly what way he looks different.
It's like that Uncanny Valley thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So, the plan was, and again, I never knew this at the time, plan was to give Warrior another title run. He was supposed to turn heel on Savage at SummerSlam. Do you remember that weird Mr. Perfect was meant to be aligned with one of them, but he wasn't saying who he was aligned with? Somebody had bought his services, but it was SummerSlam 92. It was in the middle of the card because it was Brett and Davey Boy last.
Yes,
and
yes.
There's this sort of awkward babyface match where everyone's waiting for one of them to turn, but neither does.
Yeah.
Warrior was supposed to turn. That was the plan all along, but then at the point they got close to the match, he refused to do it because he didn't want to lose the merchandise money. So Warrior refused to turn. And we then get steroid trial. Your muscle-bound guys are slowly disappearing, being ushered out. Depending on who you believe, this new Warrior or the original Warrior failed a steroid test, or
no way, don't believe it.
Or could have been experimenting with growth hormone. It was one of those. And he briefly he returned to squash Triple H at Mania 12, was that? And had a brief run in WCW featuring one of the worst matches of all time with Hogan and a fireball that went weird. Warrior looked different. But my take on it is, from what we saw, beyond him looking different, we saw him have a few matches, he was still the same terrible worker as he had been. He was still terrible in all the same ways. So would they have had to train this new guy to be bad at wrestling in the same ways as Warrior was? And I also feel like, beyond the Mania reappearance, he started looking more like old Warrior had. So by SummerSlam 92, he looks more like Warrior did 2 years before. So the only way in which I found myself able to believe that it wasn't Warrior was that they had to bring in a guy for one night to do this Mania thing because something happened with a real Warrior.
And that could be it. That could just be it.
Yeah.
There's definitely. I'm just googling Ultimate Warrior, and there's so many photos of him side to side with a different version of himself, and they look so different. And it's difficult because he wears different face paint almost every time.
Yeah. But even there was something, he didn't look quite as muscular from what I remember from when he ran out as he had done before. But even his facial structure just looks a little bit different.
Like his face is a bit more narrower and longer.
Yeah.
But then they say that steroids completely changes how your body and your looks.
And if it was a new one, he was also fired for steroid abuse or growth hormone.
I need to get looking like the old guy from before. People are starting to ask questions. So was there not a rumour that Kerry Von Erich was...
There was, when I was a kid, I thought they were really similar. They obviously brought a bit of a similar energy. Maybe they just had the same haircut and they both wore tassels around some of their muscles. But I remember that rumour kicking about. My take on it is, for certainly the vast majority of the run, including the before and after, I think it was the same guy. but he did look a bit weird at Mania 8.
So you could be convinced, or you're almost are convinced that possibly at some point somebody was deputising for reasons.
I mean, if Papa Shango missed his cue, maybe Warrior just wasn't there. I mean, what could they actually have done? Because beyond Savage, who'd been destroyed with Ric Flair in a chair and winning the title earlier on at Mania 8, I can't think who your big headline babyface would be that you would send out if Warrior hadn't turned up.
Yeah. I think you can't look past the eye test, and for me, I can just imagine two different looking warriors in my head coming down the ring. But
yeah.
I like your theory that they had to train someone to wrestle shit.
Like he's not hurting anyone in the ring, and they're like, whoa.
Come on,
we'll get Bobby Heenan. He'll tell you about everything that Warrior did that destroyed him.
You need to stop watching Dingo Warrior matches and update your videotapes to watch Ultimate Warrior.
Well, I think there was also a promo he did at SummerSlam '92, where I watched it and I thought, I can't think that anyone else would be able to do this promo in that way.
Aye.
So I'm sure that the '92 guy was the same as the Mania 6 guy. But in between there...
Which one's Jim Hellwig then? The more recent one? Because he seems completely obsessed, he seemed completely obsessed with taking every single penny that there was possible to take from the Warrior name.
Yeah, true. Yeah, you really screwed that other guy.
The original guy's family are just like, fuck that guy. A fucking Dana Warrior award. What about Johnny Spence?
They've got all these NDAs and they're like desperately trying to show a judge and just being told, nah.
Professional wrestling, away you go. I like that one, that's quite fun as well. I've got two left. One is... I'll do the Cody, the reason why Cody left AEW. That might be quite relatively a short one and possibly not particularly that interesting to you as well. So in February 2022, it was announced that Cody Rhodes and his wife Brandi would be leaving AEW and his contract had expired. And Cody had in fact been working for a number of months without a contract. Only a month or so later, he would be on the centre stage of WrestleMania 38 facing Seth Rollins in an open invitation match. Now, just for a side note, Bryan Danielson once said that Cody Rhodes taught him how much fun lying could be, and he lies all the time, and he learned it from Cody Rhodes. In the documentary Becoming the American Nightmare, I don't know if you've seen.
I've not.
Which follows Cody's path from the sort of mid-carder that he was to leaving WWE to creating the indie buzz that he created as this sort of kind of what Matt Cardona is these days. He after he left WWE, he posted a list of things he wanted to achieve, and he basically ticked them off one by one and became pretty notorious for wrestling anywhere, anytime, on the independents all across the world. And that documentary ultimately ends up at WrestleMania with him re-debuting or returning to the company. But Cody says in that documentary that he'll never publicly state the reason why he left AEW. There's quite a lot of different theories as to why he left AEW, which I'll quickly list here. So some say that his relationship with his fellow EVPs deteriorated. Both or all of Cody, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks were all made executive vice presidents of AEW. In their book, the Young Bucks state that Cody was the last one of the four of them to sign on as an AEW EVP, inferring that there was some question marks as to whether or not he was on board with the whole operation. Some think that there was an issue with Cody and Tony Khan around the booking of his wife and the role that his wife Brandy had in the company. I think it was suggested that she was going to run the women's roster essentially, and a lot of there's definitely things that Tony Khan has said that at a certain point he realised that he needed to be the head booker for everything at a certain point. I can't remember what the angle was, but something got a lot of criticism and he just said, look, I'm going to reel it in a little bit. There was booking issues around Cody in AEW and whether or not he had control of his own booking. He notoriously ruled himself out of ever competing for the world title, which was a decision. He also refused to turn heel, and basically the crowd had turned on him by round about 2021. He took his belt off and threw it into the crowd, and it mirroring Cena and ECW one night stand, it got thrown back in the ring at him. This so-called babyface. So there's a lot of different views on what that one reason that Cody refers to is, and whether or not there is a one reason. I would question, given the statement of Cody likes lying, and they taught Bryan Danielson how to lie. I suppose my personal opinion is that it's probably a mixture of everything. I think Cody seems like one of these guys who's married to old school wrestling clearly through the links that he's had with his family. The character that he plays for me is a bit of an 80s throwback almost. A very, very sort of traditional white meat babyface type character. I think if he was, pardon the pun, all in on being involved with a new company, he would want that company to be operating in a certain way. And when AEW was being set up, we were told it was going to be a much more sports-based presentation of a company. We were told there would be rankings and reasons why, clear reasons as justification for people getting title shots. And we're now in 2025, and one of their more popular matches sees 20 people wrestling across the whole arena as Bodies by POD plays on the speaker, so we're not really getting that sports presentation. So I think if Cody was involved with this, he would have envisaged Jim Crockett type of wrestling. And I think your Young Bucks and your Kenny Omega and Tony Khan even envisaged a bit more of the indie style of wrestling, and possibly that's not merged, or it's not been, a sort of something that they're able to come to an agreement on together. And there's also part of me thinks, did Cody leave WWE with this feeling like he was going to go on the Drew McIntyre path of, I'm going to dominate the indies and they're going to recognise me and bring me back, and ultimately that is what's happened?
Yeah, that was what was in my, without really having read anything or seen much relating to it. I think when he left, I mean, they'd been using him as like Stardust and stuff like that. He was not looking like a guy that, had he stayed in WWE, was ever going to be anywhere near the top in WWE. And AEW is something I always wondered. He's obviously been a part of creating this. I'd seen stuff about, was it not like a tweet about, could a bunch of indie guys sell out this arena and then
the original
involved
All In, yeah.
And then I wondered if there was maybe a point where he was like, oh, they're putting an EVP contract in front of this. This is maybe getting a wee bit carried away now. I want to go back there at some point.
Yeah.
And then you had, was there not a thing where he like destroyed a Triple H throne on screen or something like
their
that?
First
and I was
pay-per-view.
thinking, is that just to say, look at me, I'm over here, look what I'm doing?
100%. And that's the sort of thing that you hear that Vince likes.
Yeah. And then, I could think of, say I was in a real sport, let's call it, and I'm playing for Inter Milan, and I'm thinking, I'm doing quite well here, and then they offer me a massive contract extension, and Real Madrid tap me on the shoulder and say, by the way, you can come over here and we'll pay you maybe similarly, but you're going right to the top, I'm like, because they must have made him promises, I assume, the WWE side.
Well, allegedly they said, we want the whole thing, we want the whole presentation, we want American Nightmare, we want the theme song, we want everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is an interesting one, because it must be hard walking away from what you have been a part of creating, but I do suspect it was always his plan that, well, one day I want to go back there, because this is me proving myself to them, and they won't be able to deny me when I go back. I think that was probably it. Like you say, there could be loads of other things fed into it, like if he thought his wife was getting a role and then that role was taken away, probably doesn't help. I remembered watching something and seeing him get booed heavily, and it being clear he was not supposed to be a heel, and thinking,
this is odd.
Yeah. Interesting one.
It is quite interesting. And I remember watching Cody when he first came back. He was on Stone Cold's Broken Skull. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, I genuinely feel like I cannot believe a single word coming out of his mouth. It was all too polished.
Yeah.
And there's a politician almost sheen to him. And I just wonder if that quote that I'll never discuss the reasons is setting up a book deal or a big interview or a something 20 years from now. You know what I mean? Yeah, when the money dries up.
I imagine they'd be having that maybe natural politician edge to you. It's going to have stood him in very good stead when he went back to WWE.
Look what he's become.
He's even on his time since losing the title, he seems to be on all the big shows. He always has something going on.
I would argue that before Cena came back, he was made the face of the company almost pretty much as soon as he came back, which is bananas to think that the guy that was Stardust is that.
Yeah. Interesting, though.
There you go.
Okay. My last two can kind of merge, I think, because one probably naturally flows into the other.
Okay.
Triple H married Stephanie for the power.
Boom. That's a statement.
So
it's not a conspiracy theory.
Triple H moved from WCW to WWE in 1995. He took a pay cut to do so. He saw more opportunity there. He started out as the Connecticut Blue Blood gimmick and was always accompanied by a valet. We then go into the storyline where he's with China, and he is with China, and various iterations of DX. And then he goes into a storyline with the boss's daughter, Stephanie McMahon. And I believe, if my research back me up here, there was nothing going on between the two of them at this period of time when they're first aligned storyline. But maybe sparks are starting to fly a little bit between the two of them. China eventually basically finds out that there is a real relationship going on between Triple H and Stephanie, and she, I think maybe partly because she asked for Stone Cold money, but also, this and her fallout reaction not being great, she is kind of ushered out of the company. She's not going to be there anymore.
Sorry, can I just quickly interject? Have you ever heard JR talking about her coming into his office and crying, and the way he talks, God damn it, Johnny came in, and it's just completely, zero sympathy for her. He's just what a pain in the ass she was.
I do feel a bit bad for this woman. She lost her relationship. She's no longer employed by the company. Anyway, from what we hear, from what we've been told, but again, a lot of this is from the WWE machine, is that Triple H was from quite early on involved in being brought into creative situations. He was in the writer's room, he was having ideas bounced off him. I think he was a bit of a dick, he used to shut things down, laugh things off, basically bury guys in front of everyone to the point where things were unsalvageable. And I have heard Freddie Prinze Jr. talk about that as well. So I think it's totally believable that he was in there before there was an established relationship with him and Stephanie.
Definitely. I think as far back as 97 he was even 96 he was involved.
Yeah.
He was definitely involved in conversations with Montreal.
Yes. So yeah, he is a person who has said that he floated the idea. He's, I think, said, wasn't sure if at the time that he said it, if anyone was listening, but I think Cornette, I think there were several that kind of floated the idea out there of maybe we just take it off him. And he ends up in a relationship with Stephanie. And apparently several people like Undertaker, for example, were like taking him aside saying, you don't want to do this, man. This is, as soon as that relationship is over, who's the boss going to side with? This is a bad move for you. So people at the time weren't thinking this could potentially be a great move. They were thinking, this could be the end of your career. You probably don't want to do this. But he did. And we've got basically a reign of terror, the McMahon dynasty running roughshod over everything. Stephanie really being featured as one of the on-screen authority figures. Triple H just winning main event after main event after main event, holding various world titles whenever he felt like it seemed like. And, you're not going to be able to, I think, be in that role and not be using your seat at the creative table behind the scenes to say, well, it's not really believable this guy's going to beat me, is it? It's not this guy. So, yeah, that's probably worked out quite nicely for him as he's going through that part of his career. But when we move out of the in-ring career, so I think he started taking on official behind-the-scenes roles in 2011, I've got in my notes, and reducing his ring schedule. Still working, but just a few matches a year, here and there. Usually come out for some, 20-minute entrance at Mania or something. And he ends up with various roles. So he has a chief operating officer role, chief content officer. Stephanie also has various roles behind the scenes. And we're going to come up right up to present day, where there's the whole Vince is in, then he's out, and he's back in, then he's out. Triple H has taken on the leading role in creative. Certainly early on, I think we all thought that was a good thing. And he is, aside from probably, I would assume, Nick Khan, probably from the old WWE setup, the most powerful person in the organisation. Now, obviously, under the TKO management, it's Ari that's at the top of it, but he's got a very, very good prominent role.
I always equate Triple H these days to what Dana White is.
Yes. Now, when I was thinking about, this can never surely have been said on our podcast before. Is the love real?
Say it again.
Is the love real? We're not there. We don't know. We don't see it. We see what's on screen. We see what they let us see. You hear, they've obviously been together for a long time now. I think there's 3 daughters that they have. And I always think, I think my sort of conclusion to all of this would be, I do believe Triple H would have had a role within WWE. I do not believe, without the affiliation with Stephanie, that role would have been in chief operating officer level, which is basically just one rung below the top tier. I think based on what we hear, he certainly had a mindset for the business. I think probably used that selfishly for a long time. It kept him in a very prominent position for a very long time. And he became remember when he took on NXT, he became a bit of a darling of everyone. Everyone thought everything he was doing was brilliant, giving all these guys their shine and their opportunity.
Papa H, yep.
Yeah. But, regardless of, it'd be hard for me to imagine that a guy that was as ruthless and as selfish when he was in ring working suddenly became the nicest guy in the world when he stepped out of the ring. There will be a purpose behind all of it. It is in his interest for all of the people to like him and follow him and go with him. So I think he's been very savvy through the way he has done all of this. But I mean, I always thought he was punching a wee bit. So, I mean, I believe his love for Stephanie is real. Although she's probably a bit of a dick as well.
Well, yeah, just simply, by osmosis or generational trauma or whatever you want to call it. Yep, I would agree.
So my opinion, from, listening to everything I've seen and heard, I think he would have had a behind-the-scenes role without the relationship. I think probably really harsh on the people involved to think that he planned all of this from the outset, to think, here's how I stay at the top forever, because it could have massively backfired on him at any point that relationship came to an end, unless Vince sided with him.
Wouldn't surprise. I mean, Shane would probably say it wouldn't surprise him either. Do you know what? I think somewhere in between a little bit. I wonder if it's a bit of a she's all that scenario where it started off as a little gamble, an opportunity that maybe, and it's blossomed into to what it has.
Okay, yeah, that sounds. Yeah, that sounds about right, actually.
Have you ever seen again, it's a WWE documentary, but I don't even remember what it's called, but it's the one about Triple H. It's maybe called Being the Game, or it's Time to Play, or something. Yeah. And one of the talking heads, I want to say it's Nash, or somebody that's in the clique, definitely somebody that's in the clique, said that Triple H once stood in an arena and looked all around and said, one day this will all be mine.
Well.
And they said that he's always had an eye on Vince and the top spot, but not talking about being the main eventer, not being that one, but being talking about running.
The guy running. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
And that was, that was a long time ago that documentary was made. So I wonder if that was made now, if that would be taken out. I'm sure it was Nash, but happy to be corrected.
Yeah, I think that idea of maybe I just try this and see where it gets me, and then I quite like her. Yeah, that sounds To move into my next one, because it does kind of link in with where Triple H is at right now in the company. He is the Chief Content Officer, so basically everything that is going to go on your screens is running through him. I don't think quite as maniacally as Vince used to do it. I think he probably lets some other people take a promo here and there and things like that, but I'm led to believe he doesn't rewrite shows at the last minute just before somebody's going out, unless it's absolutely necessary.
So you don't watch a lot. I think it's fair to say you probably watch.
I kind of dip in for the main shows, and that's about it.
Aye, I just wonders what you thought, because I think it was all very much like once, like the ding dong, the witch is dead, and look at what's happening. This is amazing, but pretty much everything that was good that Triple H was running to start off with was probably Vince created. Bloodline, and these days, if you are Mexican, woe betide you, because you'll be working with every other luchador or Mexican-based wrestler. How long they can keep squeezing this Samoan dynasty line of wrestlers? There's another one joined Tala Tonga now. There's another one appeared just at the most recent pay-per-view, and I know that MVP has been quite vocal about Triple H having a bit of a blinker with basically anyone who's not white. And I'm no for 1 minute suggesting it's like conscious racism or anything like that, but sometimes like you just think you want to see, having watched Lucha Underground, like you want to see Santos Escobar involved with like LA Knight or something, or Ray Phoenix wrestle.
It's like we've certainly exchanged opinions on it a few times, because it must be the most difficult role, because he probably, I imagine, when at the point that he got the reins, Triple H got the reins and was taken over, we've always heard, he likes your long-term storylines and things like that. And there were some of them on the go at the point that he took over, and probably, I think a lot of writers say the hardest bit is your ending. You can write the best book in the world, and you watch the ending, and it's nothing. It's and I think it's certainly from what I've seen and I'm aware of, there's a few endings maybe been botched at times in what they've done, but you do wonder at times, what do his bosses want? What are they asking him to do? What are they, what way are they steering him? I like to remember when it went to quite, long title reigns, long programs, and all that. But I don't think they can all be that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And maybe he needs another voice, a different voice.
We liked when he seemed to be bringing back the sort of prestige of the Intercontinental title and the US title, and giving them a bit, them not just be something that gets handed about. And Gunther ran that Intercontinental title reign for over a year or something like that. Anyway, what you just said there about what the bosses want is very relevant to what you're going to talk about. So sorry. So
we're going to talk about whether The Rock and Brian Gewirtz, apologies if I've mispronounced that, want to take the power away from Triple H. So basically all of his booking power, his position at the top of creative in the company. So The Rock and Triple H have quite a storied history. I think it's well acknowledged that when they were battling for top spot around 98-ish, they didn't get on very well. They were genuinely competitive. I think we talked earlier about Brett and Shawn, and it sounds like each one of them kind of would have had a guy pushing them from either side. And those two clashed, and it sounded like it was real, but Vince was happy to go with it because he felt like it brought something out of it. It brought out that competitive edge. You look at the runs they both had, and then the divergence. Rock goes Hollywood. Rock goes and makes it as this huge global star. Triple H stays and ends up leading the business from a creative point of view. And then The Rock is going to return. We've got the TKO merger, which brings him back on screen, but also on the board of directors. So he has a powerful voice around that table. If you are Ari Emanuel, if he talks, I would think you're listening to him. Yeah. You're listening to The Rock. Now, we've seen certainly, I think things that were quite positive in terms of the way they were received about, the main event where Cody finally beat Roman Reigns and The Rock's involvement in that. I think, it was a bit of a stramash in front of our eyes, but it was entertaining. It was very entertaining. And then we've had this slightly more curious stuff of recent times. So we get the John Cena turn with The Rock basically seemingly guiding him in a really weird way, because again, we talked about this before, he won his title shot clean. I don't understand what it was that The Rock gave him in that moment, other than some pop star turning out to come down to the ring, taking about 25 minutes to get there at the following WrestleMania. I don't know, the whole way that was done was weird to me, because I would have thought it would have made so much more sense if, say, it hadn't been, might not have got the eyeballs, but say it hadn't been Cody in the ring at the point of turn. Say it was Cena and Punk as they're the last two in the chamber or whatever, and The Rock looks like he's going to get involved. They fight him off and they say, "Nah, we're finishing this, the two of us. There's nothing to do with you." And then Cena turns on him with The Rock's help or something like that. Something that actually meant something. But anyway,
that is logical and not about him asking for someone's soul. And
weird.
Do you know what? At the time that happened, you and I both praised it and we said it looked cool.
It did.
The whole slitting of the throat thing from The Rock, and it did look cool, but we didn't then go into the detail that you've just spoke about the chamber, because it doesn't make sense.
So, I mean, your only conclusion that you're left with is The Rock is going to use his influence and power to stack the deck so that Cena comes out of this as world champion.
Yeah, he was supposed to be his champion.
Yeah.
He was going to do his bidding and do whatever it was that Rock wanted to do.
Yeah. So we get to WrestleMania, and The Rock doesn't appear. I forget his name. The rapper guy comes out. He appears.
Travis Scott.
That's it. And it felt it's just really deflating. There was nothing. It didn't deliver on anything that you thought it may have promised. And then, and in the aftermath of that, because Rock had kind of been teasing, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be elsewhere, and everyone's thinking, like, yeah, right. You're definitely going to turn up for it, but he doesn't turn up for it. And then we hear something about how he told the guys that The Rock's part in this is done or whatever. And you're like, that's weird. That just seems weird. And then there was some sort of interview where
the day after WrestleMania, was it?
Yeah, where The Rock kind of buries Triple H, where he's talking about despite being, involved in the early stages, various decisions, he kind of he threw the booking under the bus. He said it's not how I would have done it, or it's something like that. And obviously, in this moment, I was feeling for Triple H, because you can only imagine that The Rock has said, "Oh, I need to be the guy that turns such and such. He needs to turn heel in the line with me." Triple H is probably like, "Right, guys, write this. That's the way we're going to go." And it's like, I'm not going to be at Mania, by the way. I'm just, I don't think that's appropriate. It felt like he was setting him up to fail. Now, intertwined with all of this, we have Brian Gewirtz, who is a highly thought of writer, who did a lot of Rock stuff in the Attitude Era. He wrote with him, he was his guy, did a lot of stuff with Edge and Christian and Kurt Angle apparently as well. Very, very highly thought of. The Rock, when he gets his company up and running, he brings in Brian Gewirtz. They're working together on a lot of projects. I think he worked on Young Rock, and has been involved in various things. But he has a wrestling writer background as well. So, a lot of people out there suggest that maybe what Rock wants to do, and why Rock has been sort of playing this way with Triple H, is that he would quite like to remove him from that position as head of creative and put in his guy, his boy, Brian Gewirtz. So, obviously The Rock isn't in a position to be the guy that makes that decision, but as we've talked about, he's on the board. He has a voice. So, is there enough there reason to believe that Rock would like to make that switch, would like to get rid of Triple H and bring in his guy?
I think to add to this conspiracy, as a bit of a movie fan and a reader of rumours and all that sort of thing, the Rock, the humble Rock who worked on Walking Tall, supposedly humble, is not the same Rock that was Black Adam, that basically tried to take over the DC universe of movies. He tried to politic to have Henry Cavill in his movie and completely change the trajectory of Superman's story in the DC universe. There's talk of the issues that him and Vin Diesel had as part of the Fast and Furious franchise, and how they clashed, and how he tried to sort of almost usurp him as the leader of that franchise as well. There's also all these stories about him holding up shootings for 6-7 hours whilst he's at the gym, about him pissing in bottles and having somebody have to go and empty his piss bottles because he refuses to leave the set. And I suppose it's natural that if you become the supposed highest, what was he?
Highest box office
star of X number of years, the ego is just going to go huge.
Yeah.
So there's precedence for this, I suppose, is what I'm saying. None of this would surprise me, but I suppose my only question to poke a hole in it would be, why is he not just pushed for it to happen?
Well, he might have. It's possible. Like, obviously, all that the new company cares about is making money.
100%.
That's what they are.
Yeah.
They're an investor company, and business financially is doing well. Some of us may not enjoy the product very much, but that doesn't matter to them.
They don't care. Yeah. No.
Yeah. I would have thought that the interesting point will be if business takes a bit of a turn, because there is no. We've talked before between us about the ego that's on The Rock, and I could have picked. See, after all the good part of the Bloodline work, and the well-received Mania main event and all that, I could have seen him like reading all these feedback comments and Triple H getting all the praise and thinking, that popped because of me. That didn't pop because of that guy. I could see him having that ego.
The funny thing about all this is that storyline has never needed The Rock.
No. Yeah.
The important part of that storyline for me is the sort of anointing of Roman Reigns by, I don't know if you remember, it was possibly during COVID when they were in the Thunderdome, when his dad and...
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Is his dad Afa?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Afa and Sika came down to the ring with him and gave him
yeah.
And for me, that, everybody's always wanted Rock v Roman, but I never, from a wrestling point of view, and we've discussed, if you actually look at the bloodline in inverted commas of their family, The Rock is he's almost an afterthought. He's an asterisk of that family.
Yeah.
But that's getting away off the point. I think there's a good chance that is going on, that there's a power struggle. I think if business took a hit, and Triple H would possibly be one of the first people to be hit.
I think the thing that stuck in my mind was, I do not see a reason for The Rock to have given the type of answer he did to the question he got, because there were far more diplomatic ways to play that out, but he seemed to choose to bury the booking.
Do you not think he acts very erratically?
Yeah.
Did you see he posted a photo of himself playing chess with a New Japan t-shirt on?
Weird.
That was weird, eh? It's like I think he's maybe got a perception of himself as this almost like wrestling mafia don.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right.
And he's been really exposed for the sort of charade that he's become, this sort of walking billboard, the whole thing with was it In and Out, where he or one fast food chain, he's basically, people had exposed that he'd posted like 3 times that this is my first time ever having this, and it just seems like everything he ever did for a while there was promotion for something that he was benefiting from.
Yeah,
it has really turned me, it's been really easy to forget the good stuff that he did when we were younger in the 2000s, I think, based on is this new public persona that he's adopted.
Brett would be so disappointed.
Who would? Who would be disappointed?
Brett.
Oh, right, I see. The other thing that I was going to say that poke holes in this is, does Rock want to be that involved with wrestling?
Yeah.
He's got I don't know if you've seen the trailer for the Mark Kerr biopic that he's got coming out. He plays Mark Kerr, the UFC fighter. He's apparently got booked a movie with Scorsese.
Okay. Well, that Mark Kerr, I thought you meant like the championship manager legend.
No, imagine that'd be amazing. The Rock run about as like CGI'd as a small centre midfielder.
Wee cameo by somebody playing Alan Archibald.
Amazing. Now you've got me doubting if that is his name. I think it is. I'm sure it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
they reckon that he's having this sort of run to try and be seen as a legitimate actor, and I still think after all these years, wrestling can be seen as a sort of like almost like
Yeah.
something. You know, Vince was always that way, where he was almost ashamed of being
Uh-huh.
who he
I
was.
think I think to do it and be taken seriously, you have to leave it completely behind, like Batista's done. And he, I think, is getting accolades as a serious actor now, but he's never going to appear in a wrestling ring again.
Mm-hmm.
It just won't happen.
Mm-hmm. And Cena's obviously doing that as well.
Yeah.
Aye, I suppose time will tell on that one, won't it?
Yeah.
That seems like a good one to finish on. I have got one. Will I do it? I don't actually believe it, but then when I started writing my notes for it, I was like, actually.
That was like me with the Warrior one. Yeah, go for it.
So this final theory is that the Matt Hardy, Lita, Edge storyline relationship affair was a work. And when I read it, just, wrote down that this was arc, I was like, this is nonsense. Like, it's very notoriously not a work. But anyway, I'll get a bit of background. So, Edge, who was married at the time, and Lita, who was in a relationship with Matt Hardy, both on screen and off screen, were alleged to have had an affair whilst travelling together on the road whilst Matt was off the road with a knee injury, I think it was.
Yeah.
Once it had become sort of public knowledge that this had happened, the public perception was that Matt didn't take it very well, which I suppose they reckon that they were very close. Matt and Edge, that were really close, and that he didn't take it very well. I think this may have been, when would this have been, Adam? About 2003, 2004?
It's probably around then. Yeah.
It's probably one of the first times that fans really got to know the detail of things as they were happening, because Matt Hardy posted a lot about it on his own personal website, I think, which put Edge and Lita in a bit of a firing line on the TV show and in buildings, and made Matt a bit of a cult hero online. WWE released Matt because of some of his actions online after the affair was made public, and he continued to post about it after he'd been fired. He actually phoned into an episode of Bite This, which is quite an infamous clip, where he starts shouting about Adam and Amy, and he also cut a promo on WWE during an appearance for Ring of Honor as well. It was during this time that the fans were chanting for Matt Hardy and calling Lita not very nice names as she was stood at ringside. 3 months after being released, Matt was then re-signed and returned to work a feud with Edge on the basis of all of this being a real life story that had been brought into storyline. I've said here that along with his 2.0 character, you could argue that this was probably the most that Matt Hardy was ever over during his career.
Probably. Yeah.
Certainly from a character standpoint, maybe not from a wrestling standpoint, an in-ring standpoint. So when thinking about who benefited for this, Edge definitely benefited for this. Yeah. You could argue that Lita benefited for this. Both Edge and Lita were almost immediately propelled into the main event card status. After the feud with Matt, I think we see Edge propelled to sort of upper mid card, and then almost immediately wins Money in the Bank. He cashes it in on Cena, and he's the champion. So both of them have benefited for that. Matt Hardy benefited from it certainly in a almost cult hero like way. Like I said, I do genuinely think it's probably one of the times that he was the most over in his career. He had the online community of people behind him, and fans were chanting his name. They wanted to see him, and that's all you really can ask for as a wrestling performer. They both got prominent spots on the pay-per-view, and you could argue that some of their matches were more anticipated than a lot of the main events, whilst they were, sometimes they were not that high up the card. They were arguably more important, and people were more interested. in their matches. So and if this was a work, you would assume that they would have expected Matt to. So Matt ended up losing the. I think it was a winner leaves Raw.
Yeah, it was like a best of three they ended up doing, and
he ended up going to SmackDown, and you could see that if this was a work, that they expected him to take that momentum with him, despite losing, maybe taking the sympathetic babyface route.
Yeah,
he's been undercut by this Jezebel and his best friend, and I can imagine Vince liking all that.
Yeah.
Again, that competitive energy backstage. So I think I came to the conclusion that this was probably a shoot that turned into a work more than anything else. The one thing that makes me think this was not a work is that Edge was married and they got divorced as a result of it.
Yeah, and then I'm pretty sure like the actual relationship didn't last that long.
It fizzled out really quickly. They were when they were paired
on screen, but not a couple.
Yeah,
not a couple behind the scenes. Which, oh god, it must have been quite uncomfortable. I've heard Lita talk about it, like in terms of obviously for her, she knows she's getting over in an arena because people are chanting negative things at her, but then they're based on real life, such as like this is no way to be getting over, you know.
I could see this. I think that the relationship being allegedly over so quickly adds into it possibly being a work, but if that happened now, you could maybe question it. Under Vince, I don't think he would let one of his stars go and then cut a promo and Ring of Honor.
If it happened now, absolutely. But I can also imagine you talked about how Vince would maybe have liked the sort of the tension. I imagine that Edge, having been, portrayed in the villain role in this, he went and basically had an affair with and then left with his friend's other half. I think Vince will have loved that.
Aye.
I just got it in my mind. He'll have been like, he saw something he wanted and he took it. Damn it! That's what we need.
Yeah, I can definitely see it.
Oh.
It sounds like a wrestling storyline though when you put it like that.
I remember being like feeling genuine shock when because they do a Matt like leaps out of the crowd and starts attacking Edge, and obviously he's been re-signed by this point. But I remember kind of thinking, and then. We know what wrestling is, but if you've got two people that are going in a ring where there's a genuine animosity there, I think it's that feeling of something could happen. If it all broke down and they're in a cage like they were, I think, for one of the matches, who's to stop somebody from taking some liberties?
100%. What do you think? Shoot.
I think,
shoot a fair.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it worked out for Edge. It certainly worked out for Vince because he got a big part of this. He got a headliner out of it. He got a main event guy. And I think he saw it as a reason to push him as a main event heel. I don't think it... you feel for the wife, of Edge. I imagine if that happened, something was going to happen at some point, whether it involved a wrestler or someone else.
Yeah.
It's... I'm fairly sure it was a shoot, but yeah, you're right about if that happened now, I don't think anything could convince me that it wasn't a work.
Yeah. Well, what was it you were talking about? Oh, it was Triple H and Stephanie. Do you remember? Oh, you might not have even seen it. What was that guy called Dave LaGreca that does like Busted Open radio with like Bubba Ray Dudley and stuff?
Yeah.
And he went on a huge big rant about The Rock not being involved with WrestleMania and all that sort of stuff. And The Rock had replied and said, everything in the work, everything in the business is a work, brother.
Yeah, I did see that.
I wonder if he was saying that directly to Stephanie.
Maybe.
Imagine he'd added her at the end of the sentence. Try some Terramana vodka. Terramana tequila, Stephanie.
Oh.
I'll leave you with one of these ones that I wonder if you've heard this. I'm going to be able to know based on your face as soon as I say it.
Okay.
Yeah, this wrestling conspiracy theories iceberg. Have you heard the story about Rick Rude's death? And it being potentially that it may have been a suicide.
No.
Because he wanted to shoot his sweaty hog full of steroids to make it bigger.
I did hear about this, yes. Yes, I did hear
I
about
regret
this.
saying sweaty hog.
Yeah.
Sweat hog is the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I had heard about that. I feel like somebody referenced it really recently, actually.
Really? In a promo?
No, I'm thinking...
I'll cut you off as quick as Rick Rude did his sweat hog.
I wonder if it might have been Jake the Snake's podcast, because he, I think, worked with Rude quite a lot over the years. But yeah, and at the time I heard it, and we're talking just a couple of months ago, I had never heard it before. So,
horrible image that is to leave our listeners with. So that's been quite fun. Quite enjoyed that.
Quite different.
Yeah. Have you managed to come away feeling different about any of these? Probably no.
Probably not. I'm still on the fence about the Warrior one. Something happened that night.
Something happened that night.
But yeah, no, I think like we talked about earlier, I'm not the biggest for leaning into conspiracy theories, and the ones that I believe may well have happened, like the Triple H try to take the power, Rock try to take the power. As soon as you mentioned it to me, I thought, that I could 100% see that happening. Well, I thought that what you came up with about Triple H marrying Stephanie starting off as your classic film situation of I couldn't get that girl. Actually, I quite like her. Yeah, I could see that having played out.
And Freddie Prinze Jr. worked for WWE.
He did. Yeah.
Oh shit! We need one of those. We need the Charlie Day meme board. She's all that to Freddie Prinze Jr. to Stephanie McMahon. Nice.
Nice.
What was I going to say there? We didn't tear CM Punk a new one for going to Saudi Arabia and facing John Cena and his absolute hypocrisy in our last episode. Do you know what? We don't even need to do it.
You consider him beneath us now.
The evidence is there. The man's a fraud. He should have been on our conspiracies of CM Punk's not actually straight edge. I heard he takes paracetamol if he's got a sore head.
Nothing but a fraud. The modern day Hogan.
Well, he won't be releasing the beer. If he brings out like a Saudi Arabian spring water, then
there we are. That's it.
I'll get on board. Okay, so that was our fun little conspiracy theories episode, and we'll return to regular scheduled programming next week. I'm really quite desperate for a visit back to the temple. How about you? Yeah, I'm keen. I'm just so curious about who is still there, because I'd heard stories about people having to basically get out of their contracts because it took them to court and things like that, and I kept thinking, I wonder when that happens. And I think probably a little bit beyond from where we are, but I think that's post season 4, so I would...
Right, okay. So there's no way of knowing who was going to be available to them at the point that they decided to start doing season 2. So I think we can be pretty sure we're not going to see everyone, and we'll see some new faces, but who knows who.
If Marty's back, you will be happy.
He's very charismatic.
Marty and his sister, remember?
Yeah. Marty is going to win the world title. We just all need to accept that.
Well, that's not a what's it Paul Heyman said? That's not a spoiler. That's a guarantee or something like that. That's not a guarantee. Anyway, yeah. We'll go back. We'll do first 4 Lucha Underground season 2 episodes next time. Amazing.
Excellent.
It'll be like visiting with an old friend, but that old friend would stab you in the back as soon as you turned your back.
Well, of course. Yeah. That's the fun of it. That's the excitement.
That's the fun of Dario. Okay, amazing. I hope we get to see Matanza.
Yeah, I think we will. That was a hell of a lot of setup. If there's never a payoff.
Imagine you never saw him again. All we ever saw him was him peeking out the back of that trailer, horse trailer. Right, you take it easy for the next 2 weeks and we'll speak again soon.
Cheers.